Justice Clarence Thomas, yes, the one and only, granted a request for an emergency conference in a case that is designed to dismantle New York's Concealed Carry Improvement Act. You're aware of why we had to, first of all, pass such legislation, because after being on the books about 108 years, a law that had protected New Yorkers, allowed a governor to protect her citizens from having lawlessness, for having people carrying guns concealed, in grocery stores and on subways and in Times Square and in parks across our state. When that was struck down by the Supreme Court, we sprung an action. We passed another law, the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, in order to meet the dictates of the Supreme Court. In our opinion, it passed muster. It was effective. And of course, because it works, it was challenged in court. So we had a reprieve a short time ago with Justice Sotomayor, but the next step is that Clarence Thomas has moved for an emergency conference to try and dismantle this. They are dead set on placating their NRA donors and supporters, and we are the ones left to clean it up. We are working really hard to ensure that New Yorkers are safe, what we talk about all day long, the safety of New Yorkers in our streets, in our public places, and in our homes. And we don't want a situation where there's an incident, tempers flare, tensions rise, and instead of just a shove or an angry word, someone happens to have a concealed weapon on them. That is not the New York we envision, not the New York we want, and not the New York that we will stop fighting for. I called a special session. We have laws on the books. They've tried a few times, but we expect this to continue to the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Second Circuit. But in the meantime, everyone should know that the current law remains in effect. But we are ready for any other efforts to thwart our efforts, states' responsibilities to protect our citizens. So that's what we're focused on. I will not allow their recklessness to affect the safety of New Yorkers, full stop. And we believe that our law is constitutional, and we'll stand by it. So as long as we're talking about Washington, God, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. We're facing now, our doomsday clock was launched yesterday. We are now down to 4 days before possible shutdown, or a Saturday night. So what can I say? Republicans in Washington are reckless. Their words have an impact. We have an economy that is still not fully back from the pandemic. It's not positive news when the markets and the rest of the world and investors and everyday people hear that they have individuals representing our nation in Washington who are willing to bring us to the brink once again and literally jump off the cliff. So there's over 51,000 federal employees in the state of New York. It'll jeopardize assistance for 7 million vulnerable women and children, including right in our own state, almost 500,000. That's just one example of what we expect to happen, and inspections that won't occur. And we don't expect that they're going to shut down DHS, but we're trying hard to get migrants a chance to work now. If the Department of Labor is not fully functioning, and the coordination that's required from different agencies isn't functioning, it's going to have an effect. So I say that preparing New Yorkers, that this will have an impact on New York. We talked about this at our cabinet meeting about how we can be prepared if necessary, but we don't want to, we're not going to cower to the bullies. We'll stand up, we'll call them out, and just ask people in Washington to do what is so simple. Just get back to work. Do what you're sent there to do. Pass important legislation, pass a budget, pass a continuing resolution, pass a supplemental, just do something. I'm happy now to describe, that I've got that off my chest, a very productive cabinet meeting. They're great people, extraordinary public servants. We last gathered at the beginning of summer, and we had a chance to have a reset and talk about what's happened since that time. I want to recognize the people who are here with me today who are leaders of our administration. Karen Persicilli-Keough is the Secretary to the Governor. I thank you for leading an extraordinary team of people. And Catherine Garcia, Director of State Operations, called on hourly to help solve problems. Thank you, Catherine, for what you do for us. Our newly minted Budget Director, Blake Washington, who is, has so much experience. He just stepped in the role and has my full confidence. Jackie Bray, the Commissioner of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, who we talk all day long, Commissioner Bray, all day long, all night long, all morning long. You have been instrumental in handling this humanitarian crisis. And we spent a lot of the meeting talking about where we are, the fact that we were able to make a very strong case for work authorization. It still continues. We'd like a compression of the time it takes for asylum seekers to get their approvals, because that'll allow people to, they come here seeking work, so let's put them to work. It's that simple. But what was very good news was the knowledge that at least the Venezuelans who are here, who came before July 31st, would be eligible because of what President Biden did. And this temporary protective status will make a big difference for us. I also had an opportunity to let someone who's been really key to progress with Washington zoom into our cabinet meeting. We had a senior advisor and assistant to the president, Tom Perez, who is in charge of intergovernmental relations. I made a joke that intergovernment means he is spending all day long on New York issues, because we have been speaking to him. He started in early July and have had countless conversations, but he has had meetings and Zoom calls and constant communication with us, and that's why I give him a lot of credit for helping have a breakthrough with Floyd Bennett Field, the use of that federal facility that had been a hard no. Also, his work to help us get our message across about the TPS for Venezuelans. And so he just talked about the timing on the issues, what we can expect. We want to make sure that gets out there, that it's not imminent, that it actually has to be, the change for TPS actually has to be printed in the Federal Register, and they have some requirements. So those who are expecting to start the next day will be a little disappointed, but we are in a far better place than we had been. Yesterday, I talked about directing 150 additional National Guard members to support the asylum seekers. They are literally at the Roosevelt Hotel. They're the ones who greet people when they come. They start having communications. What do you need? Helping them become assimilated, sometimes bringing food, sometimes getting diapers, sometimes putting together a crib. They're just extraordinary. And for me to be able to talk to them yesterday was really important. But shifting them into responsibilities of case management, I spoke about this. It's labor intensive. And so when people say they can only get to a certain number of cases a day, then my automatic response is, then I'll bring more people. I'll bring in the National Guard to help with this, and that's literally what we did. So the whole idea is to, and Commissioner Bray likes to talk about the front door. We don't have a lot of control about the front door. That is literally the border with the South, with Mexico, and we know what's happening there. But what we can do is make sure that that back door out of the shelters is open wider and sooner. So case management is the path to do that, to get these people on a path. Again, I will say it again. They came there to work. They want to work, so let's put them to work. And helps address our labor shortage. I was up at the Business Council just on Friday. Literally people handing me their business cards. Can you send me migrants? Can you send me migrants? I need workers. I mean, there is a sense of desperation in many parts of our state. It's incredibly challenging, and not the likes of which I've never seen before. When you have a 3.9% unemployment rate, which is something worth bragging about, it went down significantly since the 6.9% that I inherited, but that's a great dynamic, great talking point, except that means there's a lot of openings for people who are not here today. So this can help solve this humanitarian crisis, can help solve our problem in construction sites and in nursing homes and in hotels and restaurants and so many places. I've talked about the fact that we have over 400,000 open jobs. Now, for example, the Venezuelans, they're not all just qualified to work on farms. Venezuela was a very prosperous country. There are individuals who have skills, technology skills and nursing skills and construction skills and doctors and scientists. They all had to leave. And so we want to make sure we match them with their skills to the jobs that we have open. So we're close to launching the DOL-run portal, which we'll be talking about probably in another week or so of all the details on that. But that'll be in place prior to such time as the Venezuelans who are eligible are able to work. And so we also spend a lot of time on that. I have over 17 agencies right now where we are deploying personnel, leadership on down to people just helping us with call centers. We have to call through these individuals, find out who's eligible. We have to get everybody's cell phones, and there's a lot involved. But I really was grateful to my team for all the work they do. We also talked about the fiscal situation heading into the next budget cycle. That's been, of course, impacted by the humanitarian crisis. As many of you reported, our new budget director, Blake Washington, sent a letter to agencies last night basically saying, hold the line, hold the line. And we have to remind everyone, that's after 2 solid years of record spending levels to make up for, in some cases, decades of disinvestment, unprecedented funding because we needed to do that to improve the lives of New Yorkers. Areas where we had not properly funded before, like our SUNY system, foundation aid, a 20-year battle to make sure that communities that really needed it got the resources they need for education, and countless other areas. Our capital plan to make sure we have capitalize on the fact that we have more money coming out of Washington, but we have to have our state dollars to support. So we have had record spending levels, which was to make up for lost time, lost investment. But they knew then, and reinforcing now, that that is not the path we can continue on. That was a couple of years of making up, and now we have to stabilize and be realistic. And so we are still investing more than any administration in history, but we have to be smart about our investments and not let the assumption be that we can always continue at that pace. Because I'll always make sure that we have enough in a rainy day fund. The reserves I set aside have taken us from about 4% of reserves to about 16%. That makes me feel more comfortable because you don't anticipate whether we're going to get slammed with a serious hurricane that takes down our energy grid, where we have to come up with billions of dollars on our own, or even a migrant crisis. No one could have foreseen this either. So you have to be ready. And I've always long believed that we have to be prepared for any circumstances. And at the same time, we have to show our compassion to people. We're never going to compromise our values, never, ever. We're proud of the Statue of Liberty. We've referred to a lot, but reflect on what that means. Reflect on the fact that likely many of your family members, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents saw that statue when they steamed into this harbor in search of the same thing that the migrants are looking for today, and that is the dignity of a job. We put them to work. We achieve that for them. We can maintain our values, and we also solve a crisis here in New York. That is the opportunity that lies before us. So, with that, looking forward to having a nice picnic with my team as soon as I'm done with this. So if you don't have any questions, I'll get together with my...
Karen. Yeah, this is regarding the migrant situation. I think you kind of touched on this already, but I'm wondering about the possible federal shutdown and what might mean for the newly granted TPS.
Right.
I mean, are some of the offices going to be closed? You said the immigration offices probably won't close, but there's other ones involved.
DHS is an essential agency. For example, at the border, no one who works for DHS protecting the border is going to walk off their job. But we literally just opened yesterday in a state-paid-for facility 50 or 60 federal workers who've come to help us with the asylum processing and identification and getting work authorization. So Tom Perez literally described what he had told me they would do when I met in Washington weeks ago when I said, you have to come on ground, you have to come on site, you have to stand up, you have to do a search. And the answer was yes. So I don't know the status of those workers. I mean, whether or not they're considered essential or not. But they may be, but then they'd have to contact someone at the Department of Labor. That person from the U.S. Department of Labor may not be considered essential and not be there. And the other support services, if they talk about how they can get people into shelter. So there is potential that this will have an impact on our ability to take advantage of this brand new opportunity to let these people work, put them to work. So we'll see. But clearly that's not in their calculation because they truly don't care.
Governor, I've done a lot of work on mental health in the past year in terms of spending. And looking at these spending freezes in terms of next year's budget, how do you think that affects your work there? And just a second question on the spending freezes, do you see that as next year a budget with 0% spending increase? Do you see cuts? Do you see a mild increase, like a 2% cap, something like that?
We've not been talking about cuts, but I just want a recognition that there has been an extraordinary amount of money spent by the state in the last 2 years. So, Blake can describe, he had a nice graph that shows our tax receipts coming in, flattening, our expenses here, and what it would look like, how much we can compress that differential if we can have a flat budget as opposed to increases. So that is our objective. And the first part of your question, Dan?
Mental health spending, you've done a lot of work on that.
Oh, my gosh. We put $1 billion in it. When I meet governors from other states, they are so impressed with our holistic approach to solving this crisis. So a lot of those dollars aren't out the door yet. You don't pass a budget, in the spring, and then the money's in the facilities already. So that will not be affected. That is such a huge priority, and it affects people in so many different ways, and it affects other issues. People who are homeless with mental health problems. I literally had a meeting a couple of days ago. That's New York City, for example, 4,500 unsheltered people every night. Of those, 2,000 have serious mental illness. So our SOS teams are literally engaging with them. We have close to 200 individuals already since we started that were long time people who lived on the streets who had no chance of going anywhere, but because of a different approach, they are now in support of long-term housing. It's going to take some time, but that's exactly how we're going to have to deal with the homelessness problem. But mental health, we're talking about schools. I now have to make sure that there's mental health professionals in all the schools. Our resources will help that, as well as our record spending in education, because these kids went through so much of the pandemic and they're just not recovering. So supportive housing, people with substance abuse problems, people with severe mental health problems, so it's the housing, it is helping them where they are. I want to help do more with our veterans and our law enforcement. And we also, we have a crisis of mental health problems, people in construction. I mean, we have so many people that you would not expect, people that are not accustomed to asking for help, who need help. And so we're just getting warmed up in that space. I'll never compromise in that. It's so critical.
Mike? Hello, Governor. Regarding the tragic crash from last week, has your team found anything from that crash or something about the industry in terms of safety or that roadway? Anything along these lines that you're looking at this point?
Well, it was absolutely heartbreaking to know what that Farmingdale community endured. I went to the site, went into the gathering place where we had a press conference in the aftermath and talked to the first responders, talked to our state police who were there, talked to the local sheriff, called superintendents, called county executives. It was just heartbreaking to see such a freak accident occurred that this would result in loss of the lives of two cherished people in that community. But of course, there's an investigation. That is job number one. The Federal Transportation Safety Board is investigating. We are fully cooperating. And Catherine, is there anything else you'd add on? Do you want to stand here?
Certainly. As you may be aware, the federal government was on the ground earlier this week. They did tell us that they anticipated it would take 4 or 5 days before they would be off-site. And so we are fully cooperating through our Department of Transportation as well as our DMV and, of course, our state police.
Could you just clarify when they said 4 or 5 days?
I believe that was on Monday.
A lot of the state deficit is driven by Medicaid spending. To what extent do you think that the state needs to rein in spending on healthcare, on Medicaid, in the upcoming year? And do you plan on doing anything like the predecessor, MRT, or anything like that?
Well, we're very concerned about escalating costs. We are a good and generous state, no doubt about it, but also you have to make sure that you're not on a path that is unsustainable. We unleashed the first Medicaid reimbursement increase in 5 years, 7 years.
Pretty meaningful one, and you did the first of 1% across the board, and then beyond that, 10 years. So it's been
Okay, so we had to make, again, this is another area where we had not invested enough over time. If you do a percentage every so often, you don't get jammed up, but nothing had happened for almost a decade. So we had to increase it by 7%, the reimbursements, because you think about the nursing homes and the hospitals and the facilities that weren't able to cover their health care costs. And so we had a crisis last year, but we also know that those increases cannot always be counted on, that we have to right-size sometimes and rethink this. So we have an approach which is underway. We've already started. Catherine, you're managing that? And it's looking at the future of healthcare in New York. And we've brought together brilliant people from all over the country who are convening to advise us on a path forward. Many of them are experts in Medicaid. So that is our number one driver of costs and how we can focus on doing things smarter with, cuts, consolidation, whatever has to happen. But we're looking for their recommendations. We listen to a lot of people in New York, but sometimes it's good to go to a 10,000-foot level for someone to come in and see exactly what New York is doing and say, that's a good idea, that doesn't work, that's not sustainable. So I'm looking forward to getting the benefit of their expertise. Anything else on that?
I think you may remember that the governor put the Commission for the Future of Healthcare in her State of the State last year. We have spent much of this time gathering the preliminary data that they will need to make any recommendations, because it's not, we don't view it through the premise of, well, is it cost, is it how much is this and how much is that, but what are we getting? What are the healthcare outcomes for the people of New York? So are they healthier as we move forward? And that's the real driver of what we're looking at.
Governor, what extent do you see the state's role here in getting the migrants to this path of independence that you talked about earlier this week? And with that, is there a dollar amount that you were thinking of when it comes to this next budget for that humanitarian sort of element here?
Well, I'll tell you, when we put together our budget, working out this time last year, we never foresaw that we would need $1 billion in our budget, the budget we just passed this spring. So we put $1 billion in what we've done voluntarily, literally, not required by law, but because it's the right thing to do. We told the city we would pick up 29-30% of all the housing costs. And we've been doing that. But we also picked up the cost for legal services. We keep talking about all these applications that have to be filled out. I mean, that's millions of dollars of legal services. We didn't anticipate at the time that we'd go from 1,000 or so National Guard last October to now 2,200. They're not free. We have to pay them every single day. And then the cost that was definitely not anticipated was the large scale, because the volume of people continue to come in. We were focused on this when there were 10,000 people previous summer. Now we have 125,000. So we have had to go back and look at large scale sites, Floyd Bennett Field, Creedmoor Psychiatric Facility, Randall's Island. The state stepped up and said we'll cover those costs fully. Some of them run $300 million. So just people should know, if they are wondering what our commitment thus far has been. I mean, none of it was projected, but we had to meet the needs, and that's what we did. That's why we set aside money, so we can be responsive when a crisis happens. So we did do that. So when you add up all the money toward the large-scale sites, once they're fully operational, the state of New York will be, right now it's about 40%, will probably be at the equivalent of 45% of the city's costs for housing. I don't think that's understood by people. When there's people who say, oh, the state isn't doing anything. Okay, tell that to my budget director. So we have been very supportive. We know it's a big burden on the city. I also represent the city constituents, the residents as well. And so we've been very, very helpful in navigating. And now we put together another $20 million to help people be resettled into permanent housing. taking advantage of a program we have for migrant resettlement once they've properly applied for asylum. They're not eligible right now, but once they've applied for asylum, we're spending a lot of resources to help them apply. When they're eligible, the state has said we will pick up the cost of shelter for a solid year, for housing for a year, as part of our refugee resettlement program. So we don't know those costs just yet because it comes down to how many people are going to be in that number of people. We don't know. So the costs we're spending now, unanticipated. So when I'm putting together a budget now in September to be passed March 31st, possibly, it's you don't know. But you look at the history. You don't, if there's all of a sudden a change at the border and the policies work and there's fewer people coming or people are staying in Mexico to apply until they're legally able to work in our state. So there's just a lot of unforeseen circumstances, but we game them out all the time. We think about them all the time, like what'll happen in this case, this case, this case. So we have to be ready for all scenarios. And that's our job. And so the answer is, how much money will I need in next year's budget? We know that we'll have to hit at least a baseline of what we've done before. We're making commitments that'll go into the making those estimates right now, but it'll be substantial. It'll be substantial.
All right, two more. Elise in the back.
Governor, how concerned are you about the potential government shutdown impacting the work authorization that you're trying to get? I know you talked a little bit about that.
Well, that's what we were just talking about, is that Department of Homeland Security workers are essential, but in order for us to start the processing, we need DHS workers as well as Department of Labor individuals and others. So we think that there will be an effect. And this is something that within our control. I'll keep the National Guard there. I'll keep bringing in people. I'll still let the federal government use state space, but they may not need it. And that's our concern, is that this could have an effect. And for Republicans in Washington are having a great time blaming everybody else but themselves, who will never get to the table and work on true immigration reform. They don't want to see this solved. They do not want this solved because it is a great political talking point for them. They think they're scoring points. But basically, they're undermining our institutions. I mean, the shutdown just means that you don't function properly, and we're a better country than that. I've been there. I've seen statesmanship. And if you don't need to look further back than what I saw as a staffer for Senator Moynihan, when we had the last major immigration reform in this nation, 1986, I was very young and idealistic, but I saw statesmen. I saw President Ronald Reagan work with Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House. I saw Bob Dole work with Pat Moynihan and Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch and Jay Rockefeller and Joe Biden. They worked together. Their staffs worked together. We spent many, many, many nights and months working it out, Democrat, Republican, House, and Senate. And as a result, we had a policy that lasted for decades. It worked. It was the grand bargain. That is what the institution is capable of. But if you don't have leadership in both bodies who want to make that happen, and we do not have it in the House, then it all collapses. The potential is there. The potential is absolutely there to solve this. President Biden put forth a plan to solve the border crisis, but he needs Congress to pass the resources to get the personnel there to do something, and they just don't want that to happen.
All right, last one, Ashley.
Governor, the state this month went live with the ammo database to track ammo sales. I've talked to gun store owners. Anecdotally, I heard yesterday that the database still isn't working. It's been down. Is this something that the state is aware of, trying to fix? And, the start of hunting season, if it's not working correctly, do you think it actually undermines this? And how will that impact with the Supreme Court case?
I will tell you, I know how important hunting season is. As a former county clerk, I knew that none of my staff was showing up the first week in November when deer season started, including the head of my pistol permit office. So I know how people feel about hunting season, particularly here in upstate. But where did Catherine go? Okay. Okay. Oh, she got called away. Probably on the migrant crisis. You want to address that? Okay, you can address. So we are aware of complaints. Obviously, we're standing this up, but we are also getting feedback that it's working. So there are certainly going to be cases where you'll get anecdotally here and there, but I would say that, the information I'm getting is that we could have worked some bugs out, but it's working. But Liz, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just note that there have been over 14,000 transactions. There have been over 6,100 firearm checks that have been approved. There have been over close to 8,300 ammo transactions that have been approved. And notably, a small number have been denied, and hopefully that those denials have had some, effect on the safety of New Yorkers.
So it's working. Not everybody, and those who get denied may also be those who are not happy with the system. But the whole premise behind this is to protect New Yorkers and for us to understand, who has what weapons and what ammunition, because we've seen too much in our state. And I am very proud of the fact that because of our smart gun laws, you compare our state to other large states in terms of gun deaths and shootings. We have maybe 5 per 100,000 on average. Places like Florida, it's 20 or 25, 30. Texas, 30, 40. I can go state by state and tell you that we are a far safer state while respecting the rights of legitimate gun owners and sportsmen, sportswomen. But also, these are just common sense measures to protect our citizens. All right. Thank you.
Open housing vouchers across the state, or how can upstate handle that? Does that exacerbate the housing issue?
Well, if you're in possession, these are being issued to homeless New Yorkers, not the migrants, right? So you understand the difference there. The housing vouchers are only being issued to New Yorkers. The premise is that, and he talked to us about it, we knew about this, we want to be supportive of the city, continue to support the city, and the idea is to move, and this is something I talked to the White House with too, they thought if we can get vouchers in the hands of individuals who are currently in homeless shelters in New York City, and they can transition to apartments that are available, then you can make space in the interim for the individuals, the migrants who are there. So that's the premise behind this. There's no way of knowing how many that will be, but it's not forcing them to go upstate. And there's no shipping of people to go upstate with these housing vouchers. This is just saying that just one more tool they have is to open it up. I mean, if they have a job opportunity up in Utica, or they might have some family up in Utica, and they want to, I think it's just saying that they're not limited to use them only in the city of New York, which is another way to approach this. But it's not sending people against their will all across the state in buses. This is just one more opportunity to try and, as we talked about, open the back door to get more people out of the shelters into apartments. Again, I will make a pitch for my housing plan while I'm at it. We have a supply problem, right? So it'll be a challenge to find even available apartments for these individuals, and that's something we try to tackle. I want more housing built. I want more housing that's affordable built, and I won't stop until we do more. But this is one of the reasons that New York will not achieve its full potential until we get that back on path, and so spending a lot of time on that as well. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming out.